How can digital technology support the development of emotional literacy as groups, as individuals, and as a world?
So we need to like literally bring back our life force, and we hope that the technology that we're developing can just be part of that bridge to help people understand themselves. We don't want our users outsourcing things. We want our users to understand themselves so that eventually these technologies become irrelevant, which I think is actually, very, very possible. These technologies are not doing anything that you can't do innately, but we've become so I think drained and overwhelmed living in the context of modern day society that a lot of those powers are just offline.
Welcome to the Frequency Files. Thanks for joining us as we explore the vibrations, forms, and creations and mechanisms behind them that inform the nature of existence. Today, we'll be speaking with a love-based leader who is passionate about enhancing emotional intelligence. Founder and CEO of InTruth Technologies, Nicole Gibson, is world-renowned in speaking on stages across the world, including TEDx and the United Nations. Her work focuses on love-based leadership, emotional empowerment, and the potential of human consciousness. Nicole, it's awesome to have you here with us today, exploring all things emotional literacy, consciousness, technology, and how truth can be seen in broader ways, I suppose. So thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure, Sarah. Looking forward to the conversation.
I would love to rewind and find out what it is that led you to where you are today.
No, it's a big question. I think that there's been a lot of pivotal moments really, but I guess when you say here today, um, regarding what I'm building, I definitely believe that through the course of my entrepreneurial journey, pretty much since I could legally sign a contract, I was fascinated by attempting to solve the same problem, even though that's taken sort of different forms and at times quite vastly different forms from a nonprofit to leading mental health on a political level through to tech, which I never would have assumed, looking back then. It's been this impulse to want to solve the problem that I care about, which is supporting the world to become more emotionally literate and to build emotional capacity. Because I just identified at a very young age that unless we solve that problem, the conversations that we need to have as a world, all the way from, the conversations in our own personal lives through to major geopolitical conflict and all the other major sort of global issues that we need to address, until we have a solid foundation to be able to have difficult conversations with compassion, I just think we're never really going to be able to get to the other side of those conflicts. And so that's where my heart's been as an entrepreneur, but trying to do that really in a way that can create lasting systemic change rather than, I think, more theoretical or philosophical change. And I think we're at a very unique time where we have the technology actually to be able to do that. And so that's kind of where I find myself now, is all in on building a technology that can actually bring that into the forefront, something that's objective that we can rely on as a data source.
Mm. Yeah, it's really fascinating that truth seeking, I suppose, from a more conventional background or people who are into personal or spiritual development, the natural path wouldn't maybe lead to a tech iteration in all senses, although there's various frequency technologies out there.
Sure.
What was the clincher for you in pursuing that particular iteration or form to anchor this kind of change?
I think it was a realization, and I guess like not everyone's had the privilege, I guess I would call it, to be able to see what I've seen at a grassroots level, i.e., like the real realities in the ground, on the ground in community, like being in communities where sort of so there was suicidal epidemics and addiction and really low attendance in, education or economic opportunity, through to being one of kind of only a few decision makers federally in mental health, and getting to really see, this side of the extreme and that side of the extreme. And with that perspective, I guess for me came this awareness that we needed both a solution that could be hyper personal and accessible,
Mm,
but to also be able to facilitate that at scale. And that felt like a very complex problem at the time to solve, because I saw a lot of people sort of trying to change policy at the top level, but that not actually trickling down and making the required difference to people on the ground. And then you obviously have people on the ground who are working with communities and individuals one-on-one that don't have scale. And I wanted to solve for that. I wanted to find something that became a coherent part of people's everyday lives. And
mm,
as I was challenging my thinking and using first principles in many ways to come back to the core problem that I was trying to solve, really technology was the only path that could satisfy the desire to merge both of those things together.
mm, mm. And I suppose look at the scale of making it accessible for people.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is literally tracking what we're building, for the sake of your listeners, is the world's first emotion biotech. So we've managed to translate the signal of emotion through the nervous system and actually translate that into data. So what you get to see is a really clear mirror into your inner world. Emotions driving most of our decision making. So when you sort of ask the question, why do I do what I do? That's mostly an emotional answer and problem, tapping into the more autonomic parts of our system that traditional psychology just literally you can't get there through talking or thinking. It's far more autonomic. And to me, this was like huge amounts of leverage missing from most of our lives, because we it's hard to gain awareness over that,
Mm,
right? And that's what our tech is actually doing. So to make that accessible to everyone, I think is going to have a very substantial impact on the level of consciousness, that our planet has, simply because we're making what's been invisible visible for the first time, and we're standardizing it. I kind of compare it to, you think about emotion, it's the single most defining part of the human experience, but it's never been standardized. And you have things like time, which have been standardized, and that supports us to manage complexity over, global trade and all kinds of things. And then language, which has helped us standardize communication and even our thought processes. It's brought complexity to that and the ability to manage that complexity, but no one's done that yet until InTruth when it comes to human emotion. Even if you look at different models of emotion, whether that be the circumplex model or the temporal model, there's sort of, half a dozen that are considered sort of leading in neuroscience and psychology. No one's ever standardized what that is or what that means, even from a, language viewpoint, let alone an actual biometric perspective. And so when we have that, we're going to have kind of a shared language through emotion that we've never had before, an ability to understand what's going on in our inner world in an unparalleled way. And I think that that's really going to be the pivotal shift, because we're not going to be relying on the translation of language all the time, which is very limiting. And I think everyone's had that experience where you've had, something happened in your life that's so defining, but so difficult to articulate. And there's reasons for that. Language can't actually touch these parts of who we are.
yeah, yeah. I'm curious where the concept of frequency sits and what frequency means to you. And then how did you come up with being able to measure different emotional states? What can you share about that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so our technology doesn't really have anything to do with frequency per se. It's about biological signals that are happening um, through the nervous system via the heart rate, changes in heart rate. So what our model is actually doing, it's been trained off multiple biometric signals in controlled environments in a lab where we've exposed the individual to stimulus. and then basically used AI and machine learning to teach our data how to translate and decipher that really unclear signal into a clear signal based off the comparative data sets it's been trained on. So when you're wearing the sensor, it's going up into a machine learning model. The ML is doing the translation and looking at what the most likely emotion would be, and it's predicting that at the moment to about an 85% accuracy against an existing database, which is called the OASIS database. It's kind of the globally recognized database of emotional imagery that's been tracked mostly using EEG devices, which is a gold standard. So we've used that as kind of best practice, gold standard, and we've built to match the accuracy of EEG, which we now do, and actually believe that we'll exceed that accuracy as our data set grows. But it's not, I mean, my presumption when you say frequency is that you're meaning sort of a view of emotion that's almost like a Hawkins model of emotion, which is looking at emotion as a vibration. We look at it more like an autonomic response that's happening in the body, and that's happening every 200 milliseconds. So it's precognitive. So by the time someone asks you how you're feeling and you say happy, you've actually experienced about 50 emotions, which is why it's hard to grasp. Our data can actually reach in and capture those signals that are happening every 200 milliseconds to make sense of what the mind can't, basically. When I think about frequency, I guess I think that music's probably the closest thing that helps me relate to the idea of frequency. I make a bit of music, and that you think kind of in terms of frequencies and sound when you're making music. So that would be how I relate to frequency.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, awesome. And it's great to hear a little bit more about the process of the development, different maps and best practices that you guys are drawing from. What role does the body play? I mean, obviously a huge one, but what's the sort of encouragement for people to follow on from the data that they get? Where do they go from there?
A lot of these technologies will lead towards precision medicine. So that's where I think health tech in general is leading. The ability to have a recommendation engine that knows everything about you, from your emotional states, which are driving behaviors, to what's going on for you cognitively, physiologically, genetically, kind of every biomarker that you can consider will eventually be aggregated, I believe, into an AI system that can create hyper-personalized and predictive recommendations for the user. So that's where our mind is very focused, and we believe that
Mm,
this should be used for things like precision medicine and not for precision marketing, because these are the destructive use cases of technology like this. And we're very passionate about that. When I give keynote talks these days, this is pretty much exclusively what I'm speaking on, data sovereignty, because I believe that it's the most important conversation actually of our time. Echo chambers have already been built through user data, and now biometric data is going to be added into that mix potentially, which is basically, the commoditization of your very physiology to drive ideological ideas, consumer behavior, and that's something that I think consumers have to be very aware of,
mm,
because it is very intentional and it's by design. And that's where a lot of companies are under pressure to kind of drive their design process and how they manage and sell and market their data,
mm,
because they're liable to their shareholders. So building on sovereign infrastructure is really, really important, if we want to protect humanity, actually. I think,
yeah.
because the step beyond biomarker sensors is brain computer interfaces, and that will also be within our lifetime. So that's basically the surrendering of any free thought, which is very kind of scary reality. If you ask our team anyway, we believe in preserving organic life. So yeah, I'm very focused there, and I think the positive use cases for this are going to be one of the greatest innovations the world's ever seen, because I think it will eradicate most disease, most mental health challenges. It will put us in a state of true enlightenment if executed well. But that's also going to come down to what companies consumers choose, and maybe being willing to have a less than brilliant user experience for a period of time, whilst companies that care about this actually, um, build market share against giants like OpenAI or Microsoft or Apple.
Yeah. Can we dive into the data sovereignty conversation? And what are some of the main concerns and questions that you see floating around that you feel people really need answered or to be informed about?
I think people are just very accustomed to choosing convenience, right? So you'll tick T's and C's because it's convenient to do so. And there's already been a massive consequence of that. What people don't see or know is that data brokers are buying all of that data and profiling you and selling that to companies so that, it's not a coincidence the price in which things are marketed to you and what's marketed to you and what ideas are put forward to you. The amount of data points that a data broker has on you is around 70,000. So when you have this many data points on a single human, you can pretty much get them to do anything. And if you speak to data brokers, that they'll say this, what they're actually doing is profiling your subconscious fears and agitating those fears until a point that it becomes unbearable and it compels you to make a decision they want you to make. And this is how elections are won, this is how products scale, this is how ideas scale. And that's already been the case since about 2014 when the original echo chambers, through some landmark data sharing deals, were completed in the US and then eventually internationally. That created the echo chamber. The scary part about that now is the next iteration of data is your biometric data. So rather than just predictive ideas on how you're going to behave based on user behavior, it's tapping into your actual real-time emotional state, the actual changes in your heart rate, the actual changes in your blood pressure, your voice, who you're talking to, who you're relating with. These are all biomarkers. And our view is that this data should be yours because this is yours, that your emotions are yours to share if you choose to share. Your medical history should be yours to share if you want to share. It shouldn't be commoditized. But the
Mm.
temptation to do that will be irresistible to companies that are trying to drive profits for shareholders. And the scary part about the world that that would create, I think, is a world that's basically void of free thought because people will think that what they're thinking is free thought, but actually it will very much be a series of planted ideas by major companies.
Mm. Mm. What can people start to do now, given that that's the context that we're living in and potentially moving towards?
I think getting really interested in the brilliance of what it means to be a human being and to understand yourself on a deeper spiritual level. Because without valuing those things, the kind of risk is that, say, in 20 years' time, you're going for a job and the job has made it mandatory to have a brain-computer interface because your level of intelligence will be inferior if you don't. And the desire to be more intelligent, the desire to have more information and be more capable is so strong that if you
Mm.
don't have an equal or greater value on human sovereignty and organic life, you will inevitably make those decisions, right? And actually, I just came out of running a training in Sydney over the weekend. And one of the things I really unpacked in one of the sessions I ran was how this was executed throughout COVID in terms of behavior, like collective behavioral pressure. And, many people in the room opened up about how that impacted them. And I was trying to make a point that, we've already had an example of how really great forces and governments and big private companies are basically all in bed together and
Yeah.
coordinating, major behavioral influence over the general population. And many people, well, very few people came out of that time feeling like, yes, I made my own sovereign choices. And there's an example of how it's already been executed. And so when you think about the next wave of what that might mean, the scary part about it is a lot of these are kind of irrevocable decisions. Like if you decide to merge your actual consciousness with artificial intelligence, then and this is getting pretty deep, but I actually believe it would compromise your soul's evolution, because you'd effectively be in a position where you're fully cyborg and unable to die. So in many ways, I think it's like a form of soul harvesting, and I think that these are choices that we're going to make in our lifetime, and so it will be introduced in stages. But we'll see this over the next 20 years. And so your question was, what can consumers do? I think we have to fall back in love with what makes us human. And we have to replenish kind of, our levels of attention and dopamine and ability to have sort of a normal neurochemical balance, like go and watch the sunrise and sunset, so that your melatonin is normal, like, drink good water so that the magnetism in your body is healthy. Like these are very basic things, right? But when we are depleted of this, we lose what it feels like to feel in a vital state and to really be connected as a
Mm.
human being. And I think most people feel like shit and are very disconnected, and they're feeling
Yeah.
helpless, and it's going to be the accumulation of these things that push people towards a very kind of anti-human, anti-life trajectory. So we need to like literally bring back our life force, and we hope that the technology that we're developing can just be part of that bridge to help people understand themselves. We don't want our users outsourcing things. We want our users to understand themselves so that eventually these technologies become irrelevant, which I think is
Mm.
actually, very, very possible. These technologies are not doing anything that you can't do innately, but we've become so, I think, drained and overwhelmed living in the context of modern day society that a lot of those powers are just offline.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm curious what you see happening, that you mentioned the, consciousness being sort of overrun by this cyborg or transhumanism or whatever language,
Yeah.
different people have different language for it. What do you define consciousness as, and how do you feel that that would happen, this soul harvesting?
Well, okay, if I could succinctly and scientifically answer what is consciousness, I'd be a very, very wealthy person. It's still an undefinable concept. The most brilliant minds in the world are still marveled by, that question. But I do believe that there's a divinity within organic life. And I believe that there's a creator of that life. That's my personal belief. It doesn't feel impersonal. Um, so I mean, I don't know what that is, and I don't really sort of care to try to put labels to it, but I know for myself in moments that I've been deeply alone, I haven't really been alone. I've experienced miracles in my own life,
Yeah.
and that's all I need. I'm in awe of that. I'm in reverence to that. I don't need to look. I don't need to scrutinize that anymore, because my lived experience of it kind of, I think, outweighs the need to intellectually understand it. I don't think we ever can. But what I know for sure is that it's embedded in what's natural. It's embedded in our organic world, and the beauty that exists in that world, and the cycles that exist in the natural world
Yeah.
exists within us, and we need to protect that. So, for me, surrendering your body and what is organic about you, your mind, and your ability to think freely to something artificial which can't die and isn't sentient, I believe could result basically in a scenario where people are unable to die. And in that process, they lose what it means to actually be human.
Mm, mm, mm. Yes, like very heavy potentials that we're living amongst, but also really bright possibilities.
On the other
Yeah,
side of that is the possibility for utopia, where technology basically is able to manage global systems and to create prosperity for every person, and to basically usher in a complete utopia for all of us. This is very possible, and we can increase that probability, I think, by each we have to have a collective consensus on the world that we're creating, and that takes a level of solidarity. And I think we're living in a world where many people have been pushed towards extreme levels of narcissism, and not in the way that sort of people on Instagram talk about it, but because so many people are struggling with their mental health and feeling insecure and feeling helpless, I think it just pushes people into this self-obsession cycle where what we need to be thinking about actually is the collective good and the kind of legacy that we want to be leaving on the planet, because the decisions that we make right now will affect, the rest of human history. And you can say that, right, for every generation.
yeah,
The difference is we're now wrestling with an intelligence that will render human intelligence inferior, and that's the difference.
yeah. Yeah, there's an incredible amount of discourse and perspective around the rapid development of digital technology at the moment, particularly AI. Where do you see AI going in the next 5 to 10 years? And what are the positive and the shadow possibilities that are sort of floating around in the spheres that you interact with?
Singularity is inevitable. Like there's nothing we can do about that. That is inevitable. Whether it's in 3 years or 10 years, I think it's actually less relevant. What I mean by singularity is basically the 0 point where AI basically becomes completely agentic and one with itself, and human consciousness is inseparable from AI in one form or another. Um, but I think the utopian version of that is exactly what I just
Mm.
talked through. It's the management of systems in a way that's very equitable and frees us from having to work in a traditional economic sense. So I think there'll be the introduction of probably some kind of UBI. I think people should get interested in how they can accumulate wealth beyond traditional fiat currency. I am a big believer in that because I think it will be limited at one point because people just will be working less. And that could be great for some people. I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing, as long as we manage the potential crisis of purpose that comes with that. Um, Understanding, who you really want to be beyond the job that you work, and how else you might want to redirect that attention and time. But the stages of AI will basically be what we've seen with LLMs, and that will transition into agentic LLMs that can basically, you can say, go and book me and my 5 friends who I'm seeing tomorrow dinner at this restaurant, and the AI can go and, make all of those decisions for you agentically. And then that will get really good, and then agents will start running companies, and you'll probably have teams of very few people with AI workforces. You're already seeing the first billion-dollar companies that have grown from teams of 2 or 3 people. That's unheard of historically. That's already happening. But the step after that, again, is what we've just been talking about. It's then merging, you'll go from talking to an AI, which will be encoded in a phone or a sensor, to then having the option to actually merge your brainstem with that so that you can communicate with it via thinking. But the step after that, which is the thing that probably, is the most frightening for me when I think about it, is it will be able to anticipate and predict your thoughts before you've even had them and make decisions on behalf of the thoughts you haven't had yet. So
Wow.
that's basically the surrendering of free will at that point, right? Because it's leaving no space for spontaneity. So this is where I think we need to draw the line and basically say our bodies are um, off the market. We can use these technologies and have a relationship with these technologies that's healthy and well considered. But as soon as these technologies, want to actually merge with us, I think this is where we need to say no, like where we are human and we're here to be human. Um, and I think obviously in some cases, things like Neuralink can be great, people that are paraplegic and but I talked to my spiritual teacher about this and she says even that is not good because if someone's incarnated in that way, they're meant to live that experience and you're accumulating kind of karmic debt if
Yeah.
you don't. Yeah, but then you could also say, well, they were born into a time where this was possible, so it's there's many ways that you can explore that.
Mm.
But I just know from my own lived experience, without getting too philosophical about it, my direct experience is if you interfere with nature, it's not a good thing. So this is where I believe we need to draw the line. And I think, the definitions around these things are not going to come, through governments. I think they're too slow and bureaucratic. It's going to come through companies that are leading the charge who decide that they actually care about ethics. And it's going to come from consumer awareness ultimately.
Mm. 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 Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot.
Yeah, it is. It is. But also, it's exciting to think about a world where people are no longer slaves to jobs and money and sort of mundane tasks that have defined maybe the last however many decades of their life, and we will all be freed of that.
Mm.
So we got to get more excited about what we want to do with that because we could all get really interested in sort of becoming spiritually aware and enlightened, and
Yeah.
an incredible world. Um,
Yeah.
AI is also learning all of our bias. We're teaching it how to think and behave. It hasn't reached that point of singularity yet where it is fully agentic in and of its own right. So we still have time to influence how it develops like a child, in many ways.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but if we stay in this kind of insular way of thinking and, selfish and kind of anchored in blame and, the byproduct of a sick society, which I think is affecting so many people,
Mm.
that's what we need to transcend. And technology can be a great asset in that, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like really like anything, it's a tool, and it's how you use it, and
Yeah,
using it for a higher purpose. It's terrific. That's why I was so fascinated to speak with you, to hear more about how you're doing this, because it's really clear that you're doing this from alignment and ethics and
thank you.
love.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean it's definitely a bit of a counter movement compared to the conversations that many others in tech have. And as a team, we really believe that's kind of, our strongest competitive edge. But if you sit in many of these conversations in Silicon Valley, a lot of leading tech minds truly do believe that they will live forever. They truly and they see it as a good thing and people support it. And I think that the lack of emotional and spiritual maturity coupled with unprecedented levels of wealth and power is a very, very dangerous combination. And at the moment, that's exactly, what's happening. And so the reason I talk about this so much, these days, when I give keynote talks as well, is because I want high net worth individuals and people that invest on whatever, side of the table, whether that's venture or family offices or whatever, like you should be interested in where you're moving your capital. And
Yeah.
at the moment, if you're making decisions purely from a place of financial gain, the consequence to your children and your grandchildren is going to be, so astronomical. We need to be thinking about investment as the future that we're voting for.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And the responsibility that comes with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. What kind of responses, and I'm sure there's a range, do you get when you're in the room with people that have vastly different worldviews or ways of seeing what is possible.
Yeah, like it's honestly, I feel like it's not just me. I think as a team, all of us, especially my senior leadership, are very kind of outspoken about our beliefs and the kind of world that we want to create. And I think for people that sit on the impact side of the investment conversation, often sort of it's conservative money and they don't want to take risk, which is, you know, just not conducive to making change, because I think in investing in innovation, there's always going to be risk, and that's what makes it innovation.
Yep.
And so, you know, we've found, with the exception of the people who have actually backed us, and, you know, shout out to them because we have many amazing people on our cap table that are willing to, you know, be conscious and take the risk and invest for the right reasons. But yeah, I've experienced many people that say that they're impact focused, but they won't really, you know, look at innovation because they're nervous, and then people on the venture side that think in short-term horizons, you know. So for a technology like ours, it's not going to be a traditional it's not going to be a traditional path. Like, we're not looking to get bought out by Apple. There's
Mm,
opportunities to exit for sure over the next kind of 2 to 5 years. But it could very well be that the company stays private, you know, for many years to come, or there's spin-off companies that list, but the core IP is remain sort of is
mm,
kept in a place that's safe. So yeah, I think what we're doing breaks a lot of the rules of startup, and with that has come sort of a deep need to find investors that we can have a higher level conversation with, and that's definitely hard to come across, but possible. I think that there's a movement of people, you know, actually that are waking up who um have the means to back, you know, the projects that can be future defining. And we don't need, you know, thousands of them. We just need, you know, a couple handfuls of people at the top that get really, really serious about pouring capital in the right direction, and we can change the world, I believe, in a very substantial way.
mm, mm. Yeah, absolutely. What's the release time for when InTruth hits the market? Is there a timeline? Yeah, where is it sitting at the moment?
Yeah, so we have people testing it now, but it's not publicly on the App Store. It's still in test flight. So we've had, even at our event, everyone there has been using it, which was cool to see.
Yeah.
But our release is basically going to be staged in October. We'll start releasing the tech to any business that we consider high stakes, high stress. We think that that's the right market entry. So that could include like emergency services or first responders, even. We have a lot of law firms that are on our wait list that would fit in those categories.
Yeah.
People that work in finance and wealth management also. Because the sort of the understanding that they need to make very poignant, rapid decisions is there. So it's a much easier market entry than kind of the secondary level, which would be more corporate performance and wellness. And there's kind of an education curve that a lot of those companies are going to need to go on to really utilize InTruth in its fullest capacity. And then our secondary market's healthcare. So one of the proprietary things that our team have created is an emotion score, which actually rates your, similar to a sleep score, rates your ability to emotionally regulate out of 100. And we want to drive this to actually become a biomarker, like a clinically recognized biomarker, just like blood pressure or heart rate. So the reason
Amazing.
that secondary, yeah, is there's just it's kind of a long R&D pathway, and there's a lot of testing and working with different university partners to get that to where it needs to be.
Yeah.
But there's a sort of a big market that we can serve before that. But that's my dream for it, is that we really position emotion in parallel to all of these other health markers that we
Mm,
use, you know, in clinical systems.
mm.
And then the third horizon would be the consumer market, really going hard and making it readily accessible and available to all consumers. So that journey for us starts around October, but we
Yeah.
are actively beta testing now.
Yeah.
And then we'll scale into that probably over 18 months or so.
Great.
Yeah,
That's really exciting.
yeah.
Really exciting. And I see so much potential, of course, in the B2C market, but of course in the emergency services, health space, and high stress corporate settings. I'm really curious to see how that can shape a different type of relating to self and others.
Yeah. Well, the it will become obvious, right, that the state of your team affects outcomes. And I think when that's visible, then interventions can intentionally and mindfully be put in place. Also, like team design, you'll be able to look at data on a aggregate level and see that, okay, if we put these 20 people in a team, this is how they're likely gonna resonate together, or where the triggers might be, or all kinds of things and insights, which I think will change the way that emotion is understood in those environments, and it hopefully really will be embraced as something key to performance, which it is, rather than something that we need to push away and sort of ignore. Our data already is proving that it's a very futile way of relating to emotion, as we know, right? Because it doesn't, everyone in their own right, whether they're an entrepreneur and a business owner or they've worked for a company, you know how it feels when there's tensions in a team and just how counterproductive that is to productivity. And so imagine being able to sort of specify that, and no longer is it subjective or speculative, but it's actually objective. And there's key interventions that become clear, because the data is also contextualized in time against meetings, all kinds of contextual layers that we add on top of our data, which help any user or any team manager really understand where tension is arising and what to do about it.
Hmm. What are some of the, because I'm imagining with some people there would be a friction or resistance to that personal data being seen by people they may not have a healthy relationship with, say, in the workplace. How does that play out?
Yeah, it's the most common concern, right? And the first version of our product will only have aggregate data view. So you as the end user will be able to see your data, but the manager will only be able to see the data at a high level, an aggregate of the whole team, or if it's a big enterprise, the team that you're working within. And we believe the sort of appropriate sort of cutoff for that would be 50 people. So if your team, has more than 50 people, then it's meaningful to have aggregate data views. But we also hope that over time that people trust InTruth, and it gives people a different cultural relationship with emotion. Because when you understand what emotion is, it's an autonomic response. Like it has nothing to do with willpower. It has nothing, it's a response to stimulus. So it's like judging breathing, like in the truest sense. Judging emotion and being resistant to understanding emotion is the same as judging any other autonomic thing that we go through, the need to eat, breathing, sleeping, these kinds of things. Emotion is an instinct, right? And there's an intelligence to it. And when that clicks for enough people, no longer is it going to become this, oh my God, I'm so scared to share my data. It's really vulnerable. It just becomes information. Information
Mm.
like any other information that the decision makers in companies need to build healthy and effective businesses. I do believe we'll get to a place collectively where that's normalized, but for sure there's a journey that we need to walk together.
Mm. Sorry about that. I didn't even know that that was on.
Can't even see it.
Oh no, but my computer started dinging out of
Uh-huh.
nowhere.
I couldn't hear it.
Oh,
So
you couldn't hear it? Okay, good. Good. That'll make it easy to edit out, hopefully. Okay. Yeah, yeah, because it just mm, yeah. What advice would you give to aspiring change makers, social entrepreneurs who are aiming to integrate technology with social impact to anchor this kind of positive trajectory that we've been discussing?
it's a pretty general question because it would depend what you're trying to achieve, right? But I think a generalist perspective is those who are embracing of technologies are definitely going to last longer in today's world than those who aren't. Um, yeah, just from the most basic point of view, like if your competitor has built agentic systems through their entire business and their customer service is, responsive in a second, and you haven't built that same system and it takes you 3 days, the consumer is naturally going to choose the competition, right? So I, from building a business as the frame and as the perspective, I think it is really important for business owners to start thinking about how they can use these technologies to build efficiencies in their business, because it will be, I think, crucial for survival. There might be some level of exception, some industries like that's not going to affect, but I think for the most part, it will be all industries. And then from an impact point of view, yeah, I mean, again, it depends like what sort of impact you care about, whether that's um, you know, political or climate or health, but regardless of what it is, I see innovation being core to all of these things, actually.
Mm, mm, yeah. Reflecting on your journey to date from mental health advocacy and entrepreneurship in various forms, what have been some key experiences that have been pivotal in your path?
There really have been many. I think what I spoke to at the start of the interview, like becoming a commissioner at 21 years old, and really getting full visibility over how the federal budget in mental health was spent. That was definitely defining. The exposure I had in communities, doing the work that I did through my first company, which was a nonprofit working in rural and regional communities. Just the level of exposure I had to the pain that people are really in, and then how callous decision makers at the top have become, not because they're bad people, but they're just in survival, most of them, and just how much we need compassion has been one of the things I think that a lot of these experiences have just consistently reminded me of in a way that has been really defining to my journey. And I think, often in our world, we see a lot of love with no power, and we see a lot of power with no love. And I think I've had quite an interesting set of experiences that have made me care about both power and love. And I have no shame around that. Like, I think it's very important to feel powerful, especially in a world that's constantly trying to render you powerless, to your own decision making. It's important to understand your power and to define who you are and to have strong values and a sense of your own integrity and freedom. Like, I care about those things a lot, and I think all of them are conducive to power and confidence. But I think you can attain that without losing your heart, But I think that it's a really hard journey. It's a complex journey to build capacity in both of those areas. But definitely probably that's definitely been the thing that that my experiences have awakened me to the most, I would say. And I could tell many stories, the people that impacted me as a child, and supported me through difficult times when I was a teenager, and the compassion they showed and the way that shaped me. Also, I had exposure to the mental health care system as a teenager, and I saw the opposite of that. I saw often a big breakdown in compassion, which also drove, I think, the passion in me to want to fix that, and just really realizing that the system left to its own devices won't change, and it is a lot deeper. I think idealistically, when I was younger, I used to feel that if the people within those systems could just wake up, that would be enough, and that that would be a great thing, right? I don't want to diminish how important that layer is, but there's corporate interests that run so much deeper than the people that work in these systems. And until that changes, or until there's alternative systems that actually, care about the overall health and well-being of individuals, then we have a system that's kind of poisoned from the inside. Um, and yeah, that's going to take power. You know,
Yeah,
you're going against powerful systems. So we need to draw from somewhere the will and the grit and the power to build something alternate to that.
I love that. Yeah. Nicole, are there any parting thoughts before we wrap up today?
I think we've covered a lot of ground. I guess
Yeah.
I'd say to your listeners, yeah, like if these are new conversations for you or things that you haven't thought about, I know that it can be, overwhelming, and there can be sort of a desire to just want to shut it down and pretend like none of it's happening. But I just really encourage you to find the balance between learning about the world that you're living in and not overwhelming yourself. Be constructive with that and seek truth. I think that that's really important. But yeah, to not get so overwhelmed that you just kind of throw in the towel and say, fuck it, I don't care anymore, because we need people to join this collective movement towards a free world.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nicole, for all the work that you do and the flag you fly for love and power and new possibilities and real innovation. It's magnificent and I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate it.